The first thing I noticed when I woke up that February morning in Riverside, Illinois, was that my neighbor Deborah stood at my front door with her phone aimed at my driveway, taking pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. I threw on a jacket and stepped outside into the freezing air, my breath coming out in white puffs. The snow from last week's blizzard was still piled high everywhere, and I had done what any reasonable person would do after spending 3 hours with a snowblower. I had pushed all the snow from my driveway into one massive pile on the far corner of my property, well away from the street and sidewalk. "Can I help you, Deborah?" I called out. She lowered her phone and gave me that look. The one that said she had already drafted an email to the HOA board in her head. Deborah Patterson was the vice president of our Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, a woman in her late 40s who treated our subdivision's covenants like they were the Constitution and the Bible rolled into one. "Blake Quinton, this is absolutely unacceptable," she said, gesturing dramatically at my snow pile. "That monstrosity is at least 12 feet high. The HOA bylaws clearly state that snow removal must be done in a manner that doesn't create an eyesore or safety hazard." I looked at my snow pile. Yeah, it was tall, maybe even closer to 13 feet, but it was February in Illinois. Where exactly did she expect the snow to go? "It's on my property," I said calmly, "and it will melt in a few weeks." "A few weeks?" Her voice went up an octave. "Blake, we have standards in this community." "I'm sending these photos to Linda immediately. Expect a citation." Linda Morrison was the HOA president, and she was somehow even worse than Deborah. I watched Deborah march back to her house, her boots crunching through the snow, and I felt that familiar frustration building in my chest. I had moved to Riverside Meadows 3 years ago after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a nice suburb would be exactly what I needed. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom ranch with a decent yard. What I hadn't counted on was the HOA from hell. In the past 3 years, I had been cited for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list, and for parking my work truck in my own driveway because it had my company logo on the side. 3 hours later, the citation arrived via email. It was even more ridiculous than I expected. According to the notice, my snow pile exceeded the maximum allowable height for temporary outdoor accumulations by 7 feet. I had 72 hours to reduce it to no more than 5 feet tall, or I would face daily fines of $100. I called my best friend Marcus that evening. He had been listening to my HOA horror stories for years, and found them endlessly entertaining since he lived in a regular neighborhood in Chicago, where people could actually do what they wanted with their own property. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said, barely containing his laughter. "They want you to make your snow pile shorter. Apparently 5 feet is the maximum allowed height for snow piles," I said, staring at the citation on my laptop screen. "That's insane. Where are you supposed to put the extra snow?" Exactly what I said. But according to Deborah, I should have been more thoughtful about my snow removal strategy. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "You know what you should do?" "What?" "Build something with it. If it's not a pile, technically it's not violating their stupid rule, right?" I sat up straighter on my couch. "What do you mean, build something?" "I don't know, man. Build a snow fort, make a snowman. Get creative. They want to measure your pile, don't give them a pile to measure." After we hung up, I sat there thinking. Marcus was onto something. The citation specifically mentioned snow pile multiple times. It referenced the height of accumulated snow in a single location. But what if the snow wasn't in a pile anymore? I spent the next hour researching HOA bylaws and snow regulations online. The Riverside Meadows covenants were lengthy and ridiculous, but they were also very specific. Every rule about snow mentioned piles, accumulations, or heaps. Nothing about structures. Nothing about artistic displays. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan forming. If Deborah and Linda wanted to play games, I could play games too. The next morning was Saturday, and I woke up early with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I had always been good with my hands. Before the divorce, I had built a whole deck on our old house, constructed custom furniture, even helped my dad build a shed when I was a teenager. Working with snow wouldn't be that different from working with any other material. I went outside with a shovel and started shaping the massive pile. The snow was perfect for building, packed tight from the weight and the temperature fluctuations. I started with a simple dome shape, carving away the excess and packing the walls. An igloo. That's what I would build. By lunchtime, I had the basic structure of a pretty decent-sized igloo. It was about 8 feet in diameter, with walls about 3 feet thick at the base. I cut an entrance tunnel and hollowed out the interior, packing the snow I removed into the walls to make them stronger. Marcus showed up around 2 in the afternoon with coffee and sandwiches. He stopped in his tracks when he saw what I was doing. "Dude," he said, a huge grin spreading across his face. "This is amazing." "Just getting started," I said, taking one of the coffees gratefully. "If they want to complain about a snow pile, I won't give them a snow pile." We worked together for the rest of the afternoon. Marcus helped me smooth the walls and reinforce the structure. By the time the sun started setting, we had a legitimately impressive igloo sitting where my snow pile used to be. Deborah came out of her house at least 3 times during our construction, standing in her driveway and staring. Each time, I waved cheerfully. She never waved back. Sunday morning, I woke up to another knock on my door. This time it was Linda Morrison herself, with Deborah standing right behind her like a backup singer. Linda was 52 years old with helmet hair, and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she had a stick permanently lodged somewhere uncomfortable. She held a tablet in her hands and wore a puffy jacket that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. "Blake, what is this?" Linda demanded, gesturing at my igloo. "It's an igloo," I said pleasantly. "Pretty cool, right? Took me and my buddy all day yesterday." "You were supposed to reduce your snow pile," Deborah interjected, "and I did. There's no more pile, just a structure. An artistic display, if you will." Linda's eye twitched. "Don't play semantic games with me. You know exactly what the citation meant." "Actually, I don't." The citation very specifically mentioned snow piles and accumulations. "This isn't a pile, it's architecture." "It's a violation," Linda said flatly. "Of what rule?" I pulled out my phone, where I had saved a copy of the entire HOA covenant. "Show me where it says I can't build a snow structure on my own property." Linda and Deborah exchanged glances. Linda scrolled through her tablet, her lips pressed into a thin line. I knew she wasn't going to find anything because I had spent hours reading through every single page of the covenants the night before. "This is still unacceptable," Linda finally said. "The HOA board will be discussing this at our meeting Tuesday night." "Great," I said. "I look forward to hearing from you." They left, and I went back inside with a smile on my face. This was actually kind of fun. Marcus called me Monday evening, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Have you seen the neighborhood Facebook group?" "I don't follow that drama," I said. I had muted the Riverside Meadows residents group months ago after getting tired of the constant complaints and neighborhood gossip. "Dude, you need to look. There's like 50 comments about your igloo." I reluctantly opened Facebook and navigated to the group. Sure enough, There was a post from Deborah with photos of my igloo and a long caption about how certain residents were mocking the spirit of community standards and creating winter eyesores. But the comments weren't what she probably expected. More than half of them were positive. People thought the igloo was cool. Several parents said their kids loved it and asked if they could come take pictures. A few people made jokes about the HOA being ridiculous. Someone even suggested I build a whole igloo village. That last comment stuck in my head. An igloo village. I still had most of Tuesday to kill before the HOA meeting that evening, and I still had a lot of snow on my property. Why stop at one igloo? Tuesday morning, I called into work. I was a general contractor with my own small business, and I had the flexibility to take a day when I needed it. My current project was in a holding pattern waiting for permits anyway. I went outside and surveyed my yard. There was plenty of snow. The original pile had been huge, and I had only used maybe a third of it for the first igloo. I had more snow along the edges of my property from the initial clearing. I had snow that I had piled against my back fence. I could absolutely build more igloos. I started with a smaller one next to the first, about 5 feet in diameter, then another one on the other side. By noon, I had 3 igloos in a little cluster. They looked fantastic, like something out of an Arctic village. I took a break for lunch and posted a photo to my personal Facebook page with the caption, "HOA said my snow pile was too high, so I made an igloo village instead." My phone started blowing up immediately. Friends from high school, old coworkers, people I hadn't talked to in years, all commenting and sharing. Someone tagged a local news station. Another person shared it to a Reddit forum about HOA horror stories. I got back to work, energized by the response. I built a 4th igloo, then started on a 5th. This one I made extra special with carved windows and decorative snow blocks around the entrance. I was really getting the hang of the technique now, understanding how to pack the snow and shape it for maximum stability. Around 3 in the afternoon, a woman I didn't recognize walked up my driveway. She was probably in her 30s, wearing a professional-looking coat and carrying a camera with a serious lens. "Hi, are you Blake Quinton?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Jenny Rodriguez from WGN Chicago. We saw your post online about the HOA and the Igloo Village. Would you be willing to do a quick interview?" I blinked. WGN was a major news station. Seriously. People love these kinds of stories. David versus Goliath, creative solutions, HOA overreach. It's all very relatable. I glanced at my watch. The HOA meeting was in 4 hours. "Yeah, sure. Let's do it." Jenny and her cameraman spent the next 45 minutes filming the igloos and interviewing me about the situation. I explained the original citation, the ridiculous 5-foot rule, and my decision to build structures instead of leaving a pile. I kept it light and humorous, making sure to emphasize how absurd the whole thing was. "So what does the HOA think of your igloo village?" Jenny asked. "I'm about to find out," I said. "There's a board meeting tonight where they're supposedly going to discuss it. Would you mind if we came to that meeting? HOA meetings are typically open to residents and press." I hadn't thought of that. "I don't mind at all." "You should probably check with the HOA board, though." Jenny smiled. "We'll do that. Thanks so much for your time, Blake. This is going to make a great story." After they left, I went back to building. I was on my 6th igloo when my phone rang. It was Linda Morrison, and she sounded absolutely livid. "Blake, did you call the news?" "Nope. They found me through social media." "You need to call them and cancel this interview. This is private HOA business. The interview is already done. And HOA meetings are open to the public, Linda. That includes the press. This is inappropriate. You're making the association look bad. I'm building igloos on my own property. You guys are the ones who made it into a thing." She hung up without saying goodbye. I finished the 6th igloo as the sun started to set, then went inside to shower and change for the meeting. The HOA meetings were held at the Riverside Meadows Clubhouse, a building that mostly sat empty except for twice-monthly board meetings and the occasional birthday party rental. When I arrived at 7 that evening, the parking lot was packed. Normally, these meetings had maybe a dozen residents show up. Tonight there had to be 50 cars. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. I spotted Jenny and her cameraman in the back corner. Marcus had come to support me and saved me a seat near the front. I recognized most of the faces from the neighborhood, including several people who had commented positively on the Facebook post. Linda sat at the front table with the other board members looking like she had swallowed something sour. Deborah sat beside her, furiously typing on her phone. The other 3 board members were Gerald Chen, who mostly kept quiet and seemed to just go along with whatever Linda wanted, Patricia Hayes, who was equally invested in rule enforcement, and Tom Wilson, the only board member who occasionally showed common sense. Linda called the meeting to order at 7:15, her voice tight. "We have a full agenda tonight, but first we need to address the situation with Blake Quinton and his property at 847 Meadowbrook Lane." "I think you mean his awesome Igloo Village," someone called out from the audience. A few people laughed. Linda's face reddened. "This is not a joke. Mr. Quinton received a citation for an excessive snow accumulation. Instead of complying, he has created an even larger eyesore that violates the spirit of our community standards." "What specific rule does it violate?" I asked calmly. "The Covenant Section 4.7 regarding outdoor structures," Patricia said, reading from a paper. "All outdoor structures require prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee." "That section applies to permanent structures," I countered. "Sheds, gazebos, decks. These are temporary snow sculptures that will melt in a few weeks." "It doesn't matter," Linda said. "You're creating a spectacle and bringing negative attention to our community." "Negative?" Tom Wilson spoke up. "Have you seen the news coverage? People think it's charming." "I've had 3 different people text me today saying they saw Riverside Meadows mentioned positively for once." "That's not the point," Deborah snapped. "The point is that Blake is deliberately flouting the rules." "What rule?" Marcus called out. "Name the specific rule he's breaking." Linda stood up. "The board has the authority to determine what constitutes a violation of community standards. I'm making a motion that Blake Quinton be required to dismantle his snow structures within 48 hours or face daily fines of $200. "I second that motion," Patricia said immediately. "Wait," Tom said. "Shouldn't we discuss this more? Look at this turnout. Clearly the community has opinions." "All in favor," Linda said, ignoring him. Linda, Patricia, Deborah, and Gerald all raised their hands. Tom abstained. "Motion carries," Linda announced. "Blake, you have 48 hours. "With all due respect," I said, standing up. "I'll be consulting with a lawyer before I do anything. You're requiring me to destroy something on my own property that violates no written rule. That seems like overreach." The room erupted in conversation. Several people started shouting questions at the board. Jenny's camera was catching everything. Linda tried to gavel everyone to order, but the meeting had essentially dissolved into chaos. I left after 20 minutes of arguing, with Marcus following behind me. Outside in the parking lot, Jenny caught up with us. "That was intense," she said. "Would you be willing to do a follow-up interview tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I said. "This isn't over." The story aired on the 10 o'clock news that night. I watched it from my couch with a beer in my hand. Jenny had done a great job editing it together, showing my igloos, playing clips from my interview, and including footage from the contentious HOA meeting. The news anchor ended the segment by saying only in Chicago could a snow pile turn into a full-blown neighborhood controversy. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and messages. The story had been shared thousands of times online. People were calling the HOA board members snow Karens and creating memes with photos of my igloo village. But more importantly, several people messaged me with lawyer recommendations. 3 different attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes reached out directly, offering their services. I called the first one, a guy named Robert Chen from a firm in downtown Chicago. He called me back Wednesday morning. "Mr. Quinton, I've reviewed the Riverside Meadows covenants and the citation you received. In my professional opinion, you're on very solid legal ground. So they can't make me tear down the igloos. They can try, but it would be difficult for them to enforce. The structures are temporary, they are on your property, and they don't violate any specific written rule. At most, they might argue nuisance, but given the public support and the temporary nature, a judge would likely side with you. What should I do? Don't tear them down. Let them try to fine you. Keep detailed records of everything. If they actually attempt to collect fines, we'll file an injunction. Honestly, I think they'll back down once they realize you're serious about fighting this. What will this cost me? Initial consultation is free. If we need to file actual paperwork, we'll talk numbers. But Mr. Quinton, I suspect this won't go that far. HOAs tend to bluster and retreat when faced with real legal opposition." I felt better after that call. Wednesday afternoon, I went back outside and built a 7th igloo. This one I made special, carving "Stay Frosty" into the side with decorative snow letters. Cars started driving by slowly, people taking photos. A family with 3 kids asked if they could walk through the village and take pictures. I said yes and ended up spending an hour talking to neighbors I had never really met before. Everyone loved the igloos. Several people apologized for the HOA's behavior. Around 4 in the afternoon, a police car pulled up to my house. My heart sank. Had Linda actually called the cops? Officer Martinez got out of the car and I walked over to meet him. He was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with a friendly demeanor. "You Blake Quinton?" "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" He looked over at my igloo village and grinned. "Not at all. I actually came by to see this in person. My wife showed me the news story last night. This is even better than it looked on TV." I relaxed. "Thanks. I wasn't sure if you were here because of a complaint." "Oh, someone did call. Linda Morrison from your HOA wanted me to cite you for creating a public nuisance." He shook his head. "I told her there's no violation. You're not blocking sidewalks. You're not creating a safety hazard, and building snowmen or igloos or whatever on your own property is perfectly legal." "I appreciate that. Between you and me, HOAs can be ridiculous. My parents dealt with one for years, drove them crazy." He gestured toward the igloos. "Mind if I take a picture for my wife? Go ahead." Officer Martinez took several photos, thanked me, and left. I went back inside feeling vindicated. Even the police thought the HOA was being ridiculous. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It was full of legal language essentially threatening me with fines and potential legal action if I didn't comply with the board's directive to remove the snow structures. I forwarded it to Robert Chen, who called me an hour later laughing. "This is a total bluff," he said. "They hired Thomas Berkeley. I know him. He's probably already told them they have a weak case, but they're paying him to send scary letters. So what do? I'll send a response on your behalf." We'll make it clear that you're represented by counsel and that you consider the HOA's demands to be without merit. That should slow them down." That afternoon, more news outlets picked up the story. It appeared on several Chicago news websites, then spread to national sites. Apparently, slow news week combined with a quirky human interest story was the perfect recipe for virality. A woman named Alice O'Neill from the neighborhood sent me a message on Facebook. She lived 4 streets over and had been fighting with the HOA for 2 years over a fence dispute. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee and compare notes. We met at a Starbucks in downtown Riverside that Saturday morning. Alice was in her early 40s, sharp and clearly frustrated with the whole HOA situation. "They tried to make me tear down a fence that had been there since before I bought the house," she explained. "Said it was 6 inches too tall. I had to hire a lawyer, provide documentation that the fence predated the current covenants, the whole thing. Cost me thousands of dollars. Did you win?" "Eventually. But it took 18 months and way too much money. The HOA has this fund they use for legal disputes. It's all our dues money, but they spend it fighting residents over petty nonsense." "That's insane." "It's Linda Morrison. She's been president for 6 years. Before that, the HOA was pretty reasonable, but she treats it like her personal fiefdom. Deborah Patterson is just as bad. They're both miserable people who get off on controlling others." We talked for over an hour. Alice knew several other residents who had ongoing disputes with the HOA. A guy named Richard who was fighting over his landscaping choices. A couple who had been cited for having guests park on the street during a party. A woman who received a violation notice because her holiday lights stayed up 3 days into January. "Have you thought about running for the board?" Alice asked. "Me? No way. Why not? Elections are in April. We could get people together, run a slate of candidates who actually care about reasonable governance. With your newfound fame, you'd probably win easily." I hadn't considered that angle. "I don't know. That sounds like a lot of work." "So is fighting the HOA constantly. At least if you're on the board, you can change things from the inside." I promised Alice I would think about it. When I got home that afternoon, there were 2 families taking photos in front of my Igloo village. I waved at them and went inside. Sunday morning brought another knock on my door. This time it was Deborah, but she looked different, less aggressive, more nervous. "Blake, can we talk?" she asked. I stepped outside, curious about this change in tone. "What's up?" "Linda wants me to tell you that if you remove the igloos by end of day Monday, the board will waive all fines and we can just move past this whole situation." "Pass. Blake, please. This has gotten way out of hand. The HOA has received hundreds of emails and phone calls. People are calling us terrible names online. Someone left a negative review on every business page for every board member. Maybe you should have thought about that before trying to fine me for a snow pile. It wasn't personal. We're just trying to maintain standards." "Deborah, you guys measure snow piles with rulers. You cite people for having the wrong flowers. You spent HOA funds to lawyer up against a resident over igloos. Maybe the problem isn't me." She stood there looking deflated. "Linda is not going to like this." I don't really care what Linda likes anymore. She left, and I went back to my Igloo village. The weather had been cold enough that the structures were holding up well. I decided to add some decorative elements, carving designs into the walls and creating a little path between the igloos with packed snow. Monday came and went. I didn't remove the igloos. That evening, I received an email from the HOA officially assessing fines of $200 per day starting immediately. I forwarded it to Robert Chen, who responded that he would file an injunction in the morning. Tuesday afternoon, Robert called me with an update. I filed the injunction. We have a hearing scheduled for next Friday. In the meantime, the judge issued a temporary order preventing the HOA from collecting any fines until the matter is resolved. So I'm good, you're good. And Blake, I'm going to be honest. I think when we get in front of a judge, this is going to get dismissed pretty quickly. The HOA's case is weak, and you have public sentiment on your side. Plus, it's going to be March soon. The igloos are going to melt naturally anyway. Should I start thinking about what to build next winter? Robert laughed. Let's win this case first. The hearing the following Friday was held at the Cook County Courthouse in Maywood. I took the morning off work and met Robert in the lobby. Linda Morrison was there with Thomas Berkeley, the HOA's attorney. Deborah and Patricia had also come for support. Judge Catherine Sullivan was a woman in her 60s who looked like she had zero patience for nonsense. She reviewed the case file quickly, asked a few questions, and then looked at Thomas Berkeley. Counsel, you're arguing that your client has the authority to force Mr. Quinton to destroy snow sculptures on his own property. Your Honor, the HOA has broad discretion to enforce community standards, Berkeley said. The covenants give the board authority to address violations. What violation, specifically? Unsightly outdoor structures that negatively impact property values. Are these structures permanent? Well, no, but have any property values actually decreased? That's not the relevant standard, Your Honor. Judge Sullivan looked at me. Mr. Quinton, when will these snow structures melt? Probably within the next 3 or 4 weeks, Your Honor. March weather should take care of them naturally. She nodded and looked back at Berkeley. So you want me to order the destruction of temporary snow sculptures that will melt on their own in less than a month, despite there being no specific covenant violation. The HOA board has determined they constitute a violation of community standards. Community standards aren't the same as written rules, counsel. I'm not going to enforce vague aesthetic preferences. The injunction is granted permanently. Mr. Quinton can keep his snow structures until they melt naturally. The HOA is prohibited from assessing fines related to this matter. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to reimburse Mr. Quinton for his legal fees. Next case. It was over in less than 15 minutes. Robert shook my hand. Congratulations. That was about as clear a win as you can get. Linda Morrison looked like she wanted to kill me as we left the courtroom. Deborah wouldn't make eye contact. I felt fantastic. The story made the news again that evening with the headline "Judge Sides with Igloo Builder over HOA." It was picked up nationally this time, appearing on CNN, Fox News, and even some international outlets. Apparently my little snow dispute had struck a nerve with people who hated HOAs everywhere. Marcus took me out for celebratory drinks that night at a bar in Oak Park. Dude, you're famous. You're the Igloo guy. I just wanted to clear my driveway. And you created art. You stood up to petty tyrants. You won in court. This is the American dream, man. I laughed, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Alice O'Neill asked if I wanted to run for the HOA board in April. You should do it. Really? Hell yes. Someone needs to fix that disaster. Might as well be you. Over the next few weeks, as March arrived and the igloos slowly began to melt, I thought seriously about Alice's suggestion. I talked to more neighbors. I learned about all the various disputes and complaints people had with Linda's administration. I discovered that a lot of residents were fed up, but felt powerless to change anything. Alice organized a meeting at her house with about 20 residents who wanted to see new HOA leadership. We talked strategy, discussed priorities, and ultimately decided to run a slate of 4 candidates for the 4 board positions that were up for election in April. I agreed to run for president. Alice would run for vice president. Richard Park, The guy who had been fighting over landscaping would run for treasurer, and a woman named Susan Chen would run for secretary. We created a simple platform: reasonable enforcement of actual rules, transparency in board decisions, and an end to petty citations over minor aesthetic issues. We called ourselves the Common Sense Slate. The campaign was surprisingly fun. We went door to door talking to neighbors. We created a Facebook page. We held a town hall at the clubhouse where over 100 residents showed up to ask questions. Linda Morrison and her supporters tried to discredit us, calling us troublemakers who wanted to eliminate all standards, but it didn't gain much traction. My igloos had fully melted by late March, leaving just some lumpy snow patches in my yard. But the impact remained. People still recognized me around town. The story had fundamentally changed the conversation about the HOA in Riverside Meadows. Election day was April 15th. Voting took place at the clubhouse between 3 and 7 in the evening. Turnout was the highest in Riverside Meadows history, with over 200 households casting ballots. The results were announced at 8 o'clock. All 4 Common Sense Slate candidates won by overwhelming margins. I beat Linda Morrison by a margin of 163 votes to 41. Alice crushed Deborah. Richard and Susan won their races easily too. Linda gave a brief, bitter concession speech and then left immediately. Deborah followed her out, both of them looking like they had attended a funeral. The new board held our first meeting a week later. Tom Wilson, who had won re-election to his seat, joined us along with Gerald Chen and 2 other holdover board members. But we had the majority now. Our first order of business was reviewing the covenant enforcement procedures. We established clear guidelines about what constituted actual violations versus petty complaints. We created an appeals process for citations. We voted to refund the legal fees the HOA had wasted fighting residents over minor disputes. We also sent a formal letter to every resident apologizing for the previous board's overreach and promising a new approach focused on maintaining property values through actual community building rather than petty rule enforcement. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Within a month, the neighborhood Facebook group had transformed from a constant stream of complaints to actual community discussion. People organized block parties. A group started a neighborhood garden in the common area by the clubhouse. Kids played outside more often. I ran into Deborah at the grocery store in May. She was in the produce section, looking tired. "Deborah," I said, nodding politely. She looked at me for a long moment. "I suppose you're happy with yourself." "I'm happy that the neighborhood is healthier. That wasn't personal against you." "It felt personal. You made it personal when you started taking photos of my snow pile at 7 in the morning." She actually smiled a little at that. "Linda and I really thought we were doing the right thing, maintaining standards, protecting property values." "I get that. But there's a difference between reasonable standards and controlling people. I suppose." She put a head of lettuce in her cart. "For what it's worth, things do seem better now, less contentious." That's all I wanted. She nodded and walked away. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. Summer came, and with it my first real test as HOA president. A resident wanted to install solar panels on his roof, and the old architectural review committee would have definitely denied it because it wasn't on the approved list. Instead, we reviewed the request, determined that solar panels were a legitimate home improvement that added value, and approved it within 2 weeks. Other residents followed. We approved a variety of fence styles beyond the original limited options. We expanded the approved plant list to include native species that were better for the environment. We eliminated the restriction on what types of vehicles could be parked in driveways. Not everyone was happy with the changes. A few residents complained that we were being too lenient, that standards were slipping. But the vast majority appreciated the common-sense approach. By September, property values in Riverside Meadows had actually increased slightly compared to similar subdivisions in the area. A local realtor told me that several buyers specifically mentioned they had heard about the HOA reform when choosing to look at houses in our neighborhood. Marcus came over for a barbecue that Labor Day weekend. We sat in my backyard, beers in hand, looking at the spot where my Igloo village had stood 6 months earlier. "You know what's funny," Marcus said. "You just wanted to clear your driveway. Best snow pile I ever made. You changed the whole neighborhood, man. That's not nothing." He was right. What had started as a petty dispute over snow had snowballed into something much bigger. It had forced conversations about power, community, and what really mattered in a neighborhood. It had brought people together who might never have otherwise connected. When winter came around again, I was careful about my snow removal strategy. Not because I was worried about the HOA anymore, but because I didn't want to deal with the attention. I cleared my driveway and spread the snow evenly around my yard. No massive piles, no structures. But on Christmas Eve, after a fresh snowfall blanketed the neighborhood, I went outside and built a single small igloo in my front yard. I put a battery-operated candle inside and let it glow softly in the winter darkness. By morning, 6 other houses on my street had built small igloos too. Then more appeared on other streets. By the end of the day, there were igloos throughout Riverside Meadows, a whole community of them. Someone posted a photo to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Riverside Meadows, where we build up instead of tear down." It got hundreds of likes and shares. This time, there were no complaints, no citations, no angry board members. Just a neighborhood that had learned to embrace a little creativity and joy. I stood in my driveway that evening watching kids run from igloo to igloo, families taking photos, neighbors chatting and laughing. My phone buzzed with a text from Alice. This is what it should have been all along. She was right. A neighborhood should be a community, not a battleground. It should bring out the best in people, not the worst. And sometimes it takes something as simple as a snow pile and a stubborn streak to remind everyone of that. Linda Morrison moved out of Riverside Meadows that spring. I heard through the grapevine that she had bought a condo in downtown Chicago, where she wouldn't have to deal with yard maintenance or neighborhood politics. Deborah stayed, but mostly kept to herself, occasionally saying hello when our paths crossed, but no longer involving herself in HOA matters. My term as HOA president continued for another year before I passed the role to Alice, feeling confident that the culture change we had started was sustainable. The neighborhood continued to thrive with reasonable governance and actual community spirit. Years later, people still occasionally recognized me as the Igloo guy. Local news stations would sometimes replay the story during slow news periods or as a feel-good piece. It became a bit of local legend in Riverside, the time someone fought an HOA with architecture made of snow and actually won. But for me, the real victory wasn't the court case or the election or even the fame. It was walking through my neighborhood and seeing people actually enjoying where they lived. Seeing kids playing outside without their parents worrying about HOA citations for toys left on the lawn. Seeing houses with personal touches and character instead of sterile uniformity. It was knowing that sometimes you have to stand up to unreasonable authority, even when it seems petty or pointless, because the small battles matter too. They set the tone for everything else. And it was the reminder that creativity and stubbornness combined with a good sense of humor can accomplish more than anger ever could. I didn't tear down the snow pile out of spite. I built something instead. I chose creation over destruction, community over conflict. That winter night with igloos dotting the neighborhood, glowing softly in the dark, I finally felt like I had found what I was looking for when I moved to Riverside Meadows. A home, a real community, a place where people looked out for each other instead of looking to catch each other breaking rules. All because I refused to make my snow pile shorter and decided to make an igloo village instead.